Hello and welcome. I'm Dan Costa, the editor-in-chief of Techonomy and Worth magazine, and welcome to another edition of Worth Knowing, where I have the privilege of talking to leading experts in the fields of technology, business, and public policy that are actually changing the way we live, work, and play today. My guest today is Jeff Gitterman. Thank you for coming on, Jeff.
Thanks for having me, Dan. Pleasure to be here.
Jeff is the CEO of Gitterman Asset Management, which specializes in sustainable investing. He's also the host of Impact TV, which is on FinTech TV and Bloomberg TV. And just a few years ago, Jeff published a book called Beyond Success, Redefining the Meaning of Prosperity, which is a mission that's very close to Worth's own Worth Beyond Wealth. So we're very well aligned here.
Awesome.
So Jeff, originally I was hoping we could have this conversation at Techonomy Climate NYC in New York, the conference that we're putting on in just a few weeks. I'm sure we will be posting a link to that in the chat to register. But we're not going to be able to do that because you're hosting a climate conference at the exact same time. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing on that day.
First, I want to say that your conference last year was great. I had a chance to attend it because our conferences were not on the same day last year. So we'll have to make sure next year we don't do this again. Our conference is specifically focused on climate and capital, or the acronym AIR, adaptation, innovation, and regulation. And I would include mitigation within the framework of adaptation, but really looking at the intersection of the capital markets and global warming and how we're seeing impacts flow through and how to look at the risks and opportunities in that framework.
So we're going to talk about ESG and serving as the GPS of investing, but I almost want to sort of get into sort of the history of ESG, the way the term has been sort of politicized lately and sort of where it's going to be going. But I think the interesting place to start would be, when did you start to get interested in this intersection of ESG, investing, and climate as well? Because you were ahead of the curve in a lot of ways.
I got very lucky. I got introduced to a movie that was being produced by a group called Planetary. And that movie had Bill McKibben and Paul Hawken and a group of astronauts and also indigenous elders and really biologists. It was a very big framework that was looking to address our relationship to the planet and how we think of our relationship to the planet. And it really got me focused on climate change as an issue, and that was in 2014. And then in 2015, because of some of the work that I had done with the producers and people within the film, when it aired the first day, I noticed that I was listed as associate producer. And I have to say it was really a self-referential checkpoint for me, because I realized that in my business life and how I was allocating capital, even though I was really deeply interested in the principles of the movie, I was not completely aligned. And I didn't want to be seen as a fraud, really, is the truth of it. So I made a commitment after I saw my name on the screen and said I was going to go back and really convert my firm to 100% sustainable investing, and started a deep path of research and learning in that world.
So, and I think that was probably about the time that the term ESG started to get popularized.
Yes.
And it became super popular. So maybe talk a little bit about this, because I think that people who are sort of haven't been in the industry the entire time may not be aware of sort of the history of the term, where it started, and then sort of how it sort of lost its way and got twisted a little bit, and now where the term stands today in terms of what it means and how effective a moniker it is for the type of investing that we're talking about.
That was a big question. I don't want to
know it's a big
an hour straight, so I'll try to bite that down into small pieces, or how to eat an elephant one bite at a time. ESG was a term coined by the UN, and it was actually originally supposed to be governance, social, and environment, but it didn't sound good, so the marketing people twisted it around and made it ESG. And it was an important point. It was looking at non-financial data that was becoming relevant in the market. And we can see that in 2000, well, we go back to 1985, 85% of the S&P 500's market value was really financial in merit. It was all based on things that you could find on financial statements. By 2015, it was really only 15% of the market valuation of the S&P 500 was based on what you could find on financial metrics. The easiest way for people to understand that would be things like Google, Apple, Tesla, where a company has an incredible value because of brand that isn't yet showing up in the financials, but is material to the stock price. And the other side of that would be when the Exxon Valdez oil spill occurred, nothing happened to the stock price. When BP had their issue in the Gulf of Mexico, the stock price was decimated. So there was a new awareness of people that non-financial items were relevant to stock price. And SASB, really Sustainable Accounting Standings Board, made the really great leap to really carve out of all of this ESG data that's available, what of that was material to stock price. So it started out as a really good endeavor to just look at those data points in environmental, how many lawsuits does the company have, how is their environmental footprint, do their employees like working there, are they happy there, how's the turnover, social, how is their board makeup, are they diversified, and not from this quota idea standpoint, from the idea of if you're not diversified at the board level, how do you represent customers across all different aspects if you don't know them or have people that can represent their thoughts and feelings and concerns? So it started out really as a good idea. And everyone early on in it was in it because they knew that it mattered.
Yeah. And like, this is we're setting up a very classic story here where there were great intentions. There was a pretty good structure to start with, but there were a lot of questions that needed to be answered through the implementation. And then, so what I don't want to say it went wrong, but there's certainly some negative associations with it now, and some of them deserved, I think, in your opinion.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I think the markets will colonize anything that is a good idea. So there's always a risk in a good idea that it's going to get colonized. And when I say colonized, I really mean that it's going to be taken advantage of to derive profits for whatever company is looking at the ultimate interest in that. And I was a really early advocate that we shouldn't talk about performance when we talk about ESG, that there was really no relative proof in any way, shape, or form that ESG drove alpha. We didn't have a long enough track record to prove that. And I also didn't believe that ESG could be done within passive companies. But the rating agencies also, I believe, with good intention, started to try to make the data simpler for companies to absorb by creating one scoring number for each company out of all of this complex data sets. And while it helped the industry launch because it allowed companies to take that data in and actually make decisions on it in a simplified way without having to hire 25 analysts to look at all the data, it didn't allow for the richness of the data that was underneath the hood. And passive investments started cropping up. Those passive indexes, which were just using this one score of every company to overweight higher scoring companies and underweight lower scoring companies, was not really in any way looking at the data sets. It wasn't updating it regularly. It wasn't allowing for companies that were improving or really working on their scores to bring their scores up, except for maybe once a year on a reassessment. And ESG information is really dynamic. The best example I could give, and you said earlier, so we can back up for 1 second, that ESG is the GPS of investing, which is a term that I had coined. It really, to me, just meant that we used to use an old map, which was financial data, to make all our decisions. And yet we know when we go on a road trip that a lot of things can happen on that trip that the map isn't telling us about. There could be road closures, traffic, detours. There could be storms. There could be police hiding in the bushes. None of that data, which is all material to our trip, was available to us. ESG made all that data, all that non-map data, available to us, just like the GPS made it available to drivers. But imagine then if I told you can look at that GPS today, and then you have to take the same trip every day for a year, but you can't change the route that the GPS came up with on the first day. That's what passive investing is doing. It's saying we looked at stale data because it's already stale today because it's yesterday's data. And we made investment decisions for the next 12 months based on stale data. This is rich data. Like in your GPS, it's updating by the second. That's what you want. So to our measurement, you needed active managers that were knocking the top scores out, were bringing in the data, creating their own metrics about what was important. Looking at companies they wanted to own first, or industries that they wanted to own first, and then using ESG data to make the data more rich about the companies that they ultimately selected for that industry sector, not an ESG fund. ESG is a process. It should never have been a fund.
So how does that influence your investment approach at Gitterman? Like, how are you using that real-time data to make decisions?
Yeah, so we're a model manager. So we're only and have only, except in rare occasions where an active manager wasn't representative for an industry, only worked with active managers. And where we use passive, we make sure that at least the passive manager is active in engagement with the companies within their program. So we were very cautious about what managers we would allow in. All of the managers have to have ESG by process in their prospectus. So it has to be a detailed process. Doesn't all have to be the same. That would be like telling every restaurant that they have to use the exact same ingredients in the same way to create their meals. Want diversity. That creates alpha, in our opinion. And we look at, I should say this before I go any further. We were always more concerned about climate than we were about ESG. But in 2015, the only way to try to deal with climate as a risk was through ESG. Now there are very rich climate data sets that did not exist back then. So today we adopt climate data sets, managers that use climate data sets that are looking at both the risk. So in our core portfolios, we look at risk and try to reduce risk in our core portfolios. And then we look at opportunity for our thematic portfolios in things like infrastructure, water and adaptation, and social justice issues as well.
Yeah, I want to let's get to that point about, I think one of the things that ESG got a bad name for was that there were a lot of funds out there that were saying ESG could outperform the market, could outperform rival funds, and they needed a little bit of fuzzy math to make that happen. But you know, that message was out there, but I think it gave people this bad taste in their mouth. But there are, you know, in looking at ESG and especially looking at climate, there are both opportunities and risks to be assessed. And I think it would be great just to give sort of listeners an overview of like some of the areas where there are risks, and then some of the areas where there are opportunities. And I know in a lot of your examples, I've seen you go to Florida as a place that's being very affected by climate today, and in a whole variety of ways. So maybe that would be a good place to start.
I'd also like to just add something to your statement about performance, because we've been very public since 2018 about the fact that when you're using ESG passive benchmarks that use this top line score to claim that there's outperformance versus the benchmark index, we were saying right from the get-go in 2018 that that outperformance was from underweighting fossil fuels because of their poor scores on ESG, and overweighting large cap growth tech companies because of their high scores on ESG in this one scoring methodology method, and that it had nothing to do with the underlying data at all. I've said that at multiple conferences. I've been ignored, but you know, I said one day those sectors are going to flip, and you're going to be sitting there with your claims getting thrown out the window that now ESG causes poor performance, and that won't be true either. So I just wanted to add that to your statement that there was a lot of fuzzy math going on, because there
Yeah,
was
no, that's a very fair
sector
point.
bias. It wasn't anything to do with ESG at all that was causing that outperformance. So to your second question, or actually your one question that came out of that, the risks are in climate change that we're going to have more warming, more floods, more droughts, and more fires. And we've been saying that since 2018. We've been writing papers about it since 2020 with multiple large asset managers. The information that I use came from reinsurers originally. I met with reinsurers starting in 2015 through 2018, also met with European asset managers, but it was the reinsurers that scared the crap out of me. By 2018, they were saying that since 2015, none of their weather claims paying insurance programs were profitable. And they didn't see any path forward where that was going to change. They saw that it was most likely going to get worse. That was every reinsurer. And no matter what anyone says, including DeSantis, reinsurers aren't political and they aren't woke. They're in this to make money, and they're only going to invest and issue policies where they can make a profit. It's that simple. There's no woke policies that are governing where insurance companies issue policies. And we said in 2018 that the canary in the coal mine would be reinsurers and insurance companies leaving areas where the risk was too high to insure. And that has now unfortunately come true. I mean, we've seen 22 companies leave Louisiana. We've seen every major company, Allstate, State Farm, leave California. And we've seen multiple companies exit Florida. And that risk is now going to be spread out through state government to anyone that lives in Florida, regardless of whether or not they're in the path of these risks or not, because it's the only way that they can start to cover these risks. Florida is probably one large hurricane away from going bankrupt on their state insurance fund. They might even go bankrupt on their state insurance fund from all the lawsuits that still haven't even come from Ida. So it's a huge issue. It'll drive migration patterns, which are not considered, unfortunately, in climate models. So when economists look at climate models, they assume that population patterns will stay exactly the same for the next 80 years and then make predictions about GDP. But they literally don't account for the fact that people won't be able to work or live or afford to work or live in places that they now, in a large majority of the country, work and live.
Yeah, it's a fascinating, and we're having this conversation as the fires in Maui are just coming under control. There's 36 people dead, an entire city basically burned to the ground, small city, but and that's going to come with economic consequences for that island and for that state for years to come.
When you really look at ESG data for climate, you look at things like PG&E in California, they were self-reporting that their risk to fire was off the charts. If you look at an MSCI chart on all utilities in the US, risk to fire, PG&E was hanging off the bottom of the chart where everyone else was clustered in the middle. So that data was available, but the top line score for passive funds was great because they were converting the most number of people to renewable energy because of California policy and population of any other utility. So you missed the forest for the trees. The risk within the ESG data wasn't in the top line score. So that's a perfect example of how you can combine ESG data with future climate models and start to look at where your risks are.
It's also, I think you gave an example about bond prices too, about where you would want to, bonds are usually considered super secure, safe investments. But climate even plays into that pricing when you look at the location of where some of those certainly municipal bonds are located, correct?
When I started talking to bond houses, which is the first companies I went to because they were thinking about ESG before equity because they have longer term risk, which just makes sense. And when I first went to Europe and started meeting with them, they were talking about how mitigation could affect bond risk. And it was mostly within certain industries that they were concerned about because some of those industries might not be profitable 20 years from now. When I got there in 17 and 18, they had started already shifting to adaptation. There's going to be a lot of adaptation needed from a lot more companies in all industries because of climate change. By 2019, they were talking specifically in meetings about abandonment strategies, that there were going to be bonds that they would have to completely abandoned because the underlying buildings would become worthless. And that goes back to reinsurance. When insurance leaves and you can't get insurance, you can't sell your building. You can't do a project without reinsurance funding the project first and agreeing to it. So that's why we say reinsurance is always the canary in the coal mine. So if you follow where reinsurance companies are going, you can see there's no way for the state of Florida to avoid the risk that it's facing. Population will start to diminish. There's also this term, I don't know if you've heard this, called halfback, where a lot of people from the Northeast have moved to Florida and moved halfway back to South Carolina or Charlotte or somewhere in that area because it's just getting too hot, too long, and they don't want to go back and forth every 6 months. So they're trying to find a more central place where they can stay. So that risk is going to start in real estate in Florida. And real estate drives the economy of Florida. There's no state taxes, so it's all really real estate that drives it.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, look, we're seeing the same thing in, Phoenix has been racking up record heat waves week after week, so many days over 100 degrees. And it makes it become a more difficult place to live. And that story is playing out across the country. So I think we've got a pretty good understanding of what the downside risk is. Have you been able to identify any bright spots, any places where there are actual opportunities to invest, and things that will be on the positive side?
Yeah, and this is always like an uncomfortable area because you're investing, for someone else's misery. But, this is the capital markets. When you look at things that have opportunity, sustainable infrastructure because of the IRA bill, really comes right to the top. The IRA bill is going to really generate almost $1 trillion for alternative energy, renewables, solar, wind, battery storage, electric vehicle charging stations. There's never been a history in time where a government has put so much money to work in any area. If there are charts that you can Google that show investment in green renewable transition from the IRA infrastructure bill that dwarfs anything ever done, the space shuttle program, World War II, the Great Wall of China, all inflation adjusted. There's just never been a time where the government, the internet, has poured so much money into really a very narrow area. And it's going to drive huge profits for lots of companies. And it's slow moving. It's not, AI was very quick moving. Oh, there's AI, we got to throw all our money into NVIDIA. This is slow moving. It gives investors a good chance to invest and take their time. A lot of it is dividend paying. Same is true with water. Water, unfortunately, is the one commodity that we can't replace. We absolutely have to have water, just like air. And we are running out of fresh, clean water. There is huge investments being made in Colorado and other places in Arizona to reduce water usage. All the companies that do that kind of work, whether it's anything from desalination to reducing how much water a farm needs by putting sensors in and measurements need, are all companies that are going to be incredibly large benefactors of the infrastructure bill and climate change. And last, I shouldn't say last, in addition to that, adaptation. When you think about adaptation, I'll give an easy example. Most of Europe doesn't have air conditioning. Most of the Northwest does not have air conditioning. The hottest temperature recorded in the US in 2022 was up in Portland, when it was 118 degrees there, not counting Death Valley, but just, a place where people actually live and go to work every day. No one ever expected, even in climate models, that the Northwest was going to be the place where you saw these horrible heat waves that killed hundreds of people between Canada and the Northwest. Portland issued a regulation that all new buildings, including homes, starting this year, have to have at least one room with an air conditioner in it before that could be sold. So who's going to benefit from that? Heating and air conditioning companies. One of the most profitable companies that we've invested in has been Watsco, which is a large heating and air conditioning company. Heat pumps are becoming incredibly necessary and popular to help moderate how heat is delivered. And all of those companies are going to make a lot of money. Fire retardant companies. It's just, companies that can deliver water quicker to a fire scenario. There's plenty of examples of it.
Yeah, the heat pump one is a fascinating one because I don't remember. I mean, heat pumps are not a new technology, but I don't remember anyone bringing them up as an option until maybe 5 years ago, and now they're almost being marketed as a consumer product.
Yes.
Which is an amazing development, at least here in the Northeast.
Yeah, for sure.
So as you're making, you're supplying your model to multiple, your model's available to other investment advisors. How's it been received? Like how popular is it? Is there a certain type of profile for the type of companies and individuals that you work with?
We're not marketing it as an ESG product. This is a product concerned with climate, both the risks and opportunities of it. There are certain people that won't hear it, but rarer than you would think, especially down in Texas. When I talk to people in Texas, Texas has the most renewable energy of any state in the country. So investment in that is not foreign to people in Texas. And it's an easier dialogue, certainly, to have these days than ESG is. ESG has become an attack point of the GOP, really, because the fossil fuel industry sees it as a way to delay divestment issues. It's definitely received well. I think a lot of older white males, which make up the majority of the advisor community, still are hesitant about change, and no one really likes change. So I would say adoption is always slower than I would like, but there are firms that are using it. We've competed well with all of our benchmarks. No one's been unhappy who's used it. We haven't lost one customer that's come on to use the program and the platform. And it answers a lot of questions and does a lot of things for a firm that's not going to do all this themselves. So what we say is, look, you can use this just as another arrow in the quiver. When your kid's client, your client just died, comes in and says, what are you doing about climate change or environment, or even issues about ESG, which can be addressed by the end client in a questionnaire. So the advisor doesn't have to drive it or create a portfolio. The client can add value questions into the model and restrict shares. It allows you to answer a question and not lose a client. Some use us as an outsourced CIO. Some use us as a one-off solution when it comes up.
So it's amazing too. I just worry, I'm wondering if you were talking about the IRA and how much money was going into green technologies. That bill and large portions of it existed as the Green New Deal before it became the IRA, and the Green New Deal sort of went nowhere. And now it got rebranding and repackaged and passed. And a lot of the benefits are still in there. So it's I'm wondering if ESG needs a similar rebranding and repackaging.
I mean, I've been saying for years, ESG needs to go away as a moniker. It's why I use AIR, Adaptation, Innovation, Regulation, as the fulcrum most affecting the capital markets from climate change, because it can't be an anti-AIR campaign. No one's gonna do well marketing that, but anti-ESG is a good campaign. And I've had people on my show like Strive Asset Management to talk about their issues. I will say this: when you fundamentally dig down with anyone that's anti-ESG, what you will find, and you can find this on Impact TV, on FinTech TV, with our interview with Strive Asset Management and a debate we did with them in Sphere Asset Management, you will find that it's really about shareholder capitalism versus stakeholder capitalism. Strive will be adamant that they are not for stakeholder capitalism. And no one understands what ESG is. Every single poll that's ever been done, no one gets the answers right. 85% of people think it means extra special growth, if that's one of the multiple choice questions on it. But if you explain to people that the difference between shareholder capitalism and stakeholder capitalism is either caring about your customers and the community that you work in and your employees, or not caring about any of them and only maximizing shareholder value, most young people, especially in America, including conservatives, care about stakeholder capitalism. we work the Conservative Climate Caucus. We work with a young conservative group that has 20,000 members across the United States that is fighting for climate change legislature with the GOP. That's really where we should drive the dialogue. But let's put it where it really is, that one side is saying you shouldn't care about any of these people, including the environment. So they're saying we don't care what we do to the environment, what we do to customers, what we do to employees. We only care that we maximize shareholder value. I don't think anyone really confronted with that. I shouldn't say anyone. I would say most people confronted with that reality of what the argument is really about would say, yeah, that's a company that's going to be around long term and be sustainable. A company that doesn't care about any of those issues. I just don't see that in this world where young people really care and are pushed to change products or change clothing or make decisions about purpose and brand today.
Yeah, I think your point too, it's about sustainability, but it's also about measuring how sustainable the businesses are themselves.
Mhm.
And whether they will be around in 5 or 10 years, which is a different type of investing than monitoring the stock price and trying to figure out what your gains or losses are going to be in the next 3 months. And that change of perspective, I think, is also, embedded in some of the original concepts of ESG, but needs to be have a finer point put on it.
Yeah, for sure.
So what advice do you have? You've been going through, you've seen the sort of evolution of ESG. What advice do you have for investors that are getting into the market and how they should be allocating their money without giving real financial advice, but just general advice about the state of the market and where things are heading?
Look, climate change is a risk and opportunity, and it's the greatest risk and opportunity that the capital markets are facing. I won't say that, humanity hasn't faced greater challenges potentially, but I would argue that ultimately this will be also for humanity the greatest challenge that we face. And there is always risk and opportunity in chaos. Actually, the Chinese word for chaos is made up of danger and opportunity, 2 words. And that drives investment performance. If you're looking for places where you could see risk and opportunity coming slowly, but quicker every day, this is the place. And a lot of money will be made in this arena. It's just going to become too hard to ignore.
It almost feels like, certainly ideologically, the next generation of unicorns and billionaires are going to be in this space. Maybe it's tech associated, but maybe it's not, but it'll be in these adaptive industries that are adjusting to the new reality that we're living in. And from what I can tell, the young people that I work with, like, it is top of mind, like they want to chart their careers in that direction. And they're making, life decisions based on it.
I would totally agree. And it's also why a lot of older advisors can't find younger advisors to take over their practice, because they aren't modeling their practice in a way that younger advisors want to take over. So it'll become critical also for transition planning that you at least offer some type of investment solutions that cover these areas.
So remind us again about your conferences. Your conference is private? Is it open to the public?
So Climate and Capital at the New York Stock Exchange on September 20th, and you can go to my website for information, gittermanasset.com, is definitely live streamed. So anyone can watch the program. Advisors around the country can watch it. It's invitation only for people that are coming into the conference in the boardroom, but again, it is live streamed. And then on the 21st, we'll also be running programs at the Nest Climate Campus, which is the Jacob Javits Center. You can go to the nestclimatecampus.com website. That programming is open to the public. They're expecting about 5,000 people there. It's really the hub for Climate Week, so a lot of activity is going on there. And we'll be there from 10:15 till 5 o'clock running programming on climate philanthropy, on women leaders in climate, on interchange between government and public markets, on funding a green transition, DE&I panel as well.
Excellent. Well, I can probably make it on the 21st. On the 20th, I will be across town at City Winery for Techonomy Climate NYC, which you can read more about on techonomy.com. Jeff, thanks so much for talking to me today. This is a great conversation. I'm sure we're going to have many more.
Thanks, Dan. Real pleasure.
All right. And that's all for Worth Knowing today. Thanks for tuning in. We'll have more programming next week. I'll see you soon.